So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that this happened? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, sorry that I apparently I don't know, I had to reinstall OBS, so there are going to be difficulties. Just gonna have to get used to it. But I am here with the venerable B. Say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
And first I want to say thank you to Kerry Bronson, who sent a super chat before the said the void was here and it will be void is eternal. Of course is, and thank you for feeding the void. So we are here to talk about the venerable B a it's fair to call it an schism between two groups. One became the main group, the other one became smaller, but history.
It looks like there's some sound problems.
Oh, distant. Okay, hold on. Give me a second. How's that? Is that better?
Oh, I'm apparently loud.
Well, you're probably loud in comparison to me.
Okay.
Oh, goodness. It shouldn't be that bad. What is going on here? Oh, it's much better now? Alright. Well, Tesla Ranger says it's much better. Sorry, like I said, guys, I've had to reinstall OBS, so I don't know. Is it working better now? Yeah, it was on the wrong mic. Sorry about that, guys. So, I'll give a little explanation here. Okay, so a couple days ago, my computer decided that I was just holding down the control key, no matter what. So, I tried all sorts of things to fix it, and that's the ultimate reason the Kentwood event this week didn't happen, right? So I thought I had it fixed, but then early the next day, my computer decided I was instead holding down Control and Alt. So I tried what I did to fix the previous time. Then, so I tried what I did last time, and it didn't work. I tried starting in safe mode, that worked, but I couldn't get from safe mode to regular mode without the problem coming back. I eventually tried resetting Windows. So I reset my computer. It kept my various files, like my, video, audio files, text files, stuff like that. But it erased every single program, including OBS, which erased all of my OBS setup, which means every last little thing that I had done at some point to try to make sure that OBS was working correctly wasn't, which includes making sure I'm on the right microphone. So, yeah, sorry about that. I believe what was happening was that I was coming through my Oculus Rift headphone, which is not very close to me, by the way. And then, because I have a noise gate on, it was choppy because my microphone my speech was frequently falling below the noise gate for that microphone. So, sorry about that, everyone. Anyway, let's go back a little bit. So, Venerable Bede, you're here to talk about sort of your journey through a group that is a different group than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is the largest group that follows the teachings of Joseph Smith. But this is a different group, and if I remember correctly, didn't they split around when Joseph Smith died, and Brigham Young led a large portion of the then existing followers to Utah out of Nauvoo, right?
Yes. So when Joseph Smith died, okay, his son Joseph Smith III was only 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a schism in the church, pretty much, about who would take control of the church. Brigham Young ended up taking over, but him and the Smith family didn't get along. So the Smith family decided to support someone else. And Brigham Young said, okay, well then I'm just going to leave and go to Utah.
Right.
And then there was also the issue that most of the people that stayed.
And we just lost the Venerable Bede. I'm hoping that he comes back. We'll give him a couple minutes to try to get back here. So I'm not sure how that happened, but I do want to say hello to everyone in chat. I'm sorry about all the technical difficulties. I still don't actually know what happened or even really how I fixed it. I ended up at one point just kind of banging on my keyboard like an angry chimpanzee, and that did in fact fix it. So, yeah, that was a weird thing. Oh, and here's the Venerable Bede back again. And you have... Let's see. You are currently muted, buddy. You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Am I back?
Yeah, did you hit the wrong button?
No, my phone decided to close you out for some reason.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure how to fix that one. It could be that your power saving settings are set to do something like that. But either way, so we just get to the point where Brigham Young had sent out his call to all the followers of Joseph Smith to go off to Utah, but Joseph Smith's family had selected a different, then there he goes again. Alright. I don't know what to do about this, other than wait for him to come back. The odd thing was that the Venerable Bede was in the pre-show for a full half hour with no problem. So, okay. Well, at least it's not my end that's having the technical problems this time. It's someone else's end. But, yeah, eventually we're going to get around to doing things like talking about the community of Christ, their beliefs on around things like creationism and stuff like that. But I wanted to give a bit of a background on that. I don't really want to just do it on my own. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the void has cursed me. Yeah. Maybe if you make enough offerings to the void, this will get fixed. Alright, so here's what I'm going to do. I am probably going to end this unless we get the Venerable Bede back pretty soon. And if he drops out again, that's it. That's going to be the end of it. I'm going to see if he sent me anything on like Discord or something. His phone is overheating, apparently. So that is annoying, and it does prevent you from reopening the app. Dapper will never answer if he thinks Joseph Smith translated religious truths from golden plates in a hat. He keeps his private life private. No, I'll answer that one. No, he didn't. There's... Like, you don't get to know what my religious view is, but there's a few things where I'm just like, no, I'm not going to pretend that this is a thing that's credible. There's some options out there that I'm not going to take seriously. But the Venerable Bede is back, I think. All right. So hopefully,
Yeah, I'm on my laptop now. Can you hear me coming back through my speakers? Because
I cannot. There is no echo right now. So you should be good. You there?
Yeah. 1 second. Let me set up my headphones.
Okay. So yeah, Spinny. Yeah, I'm not going to remain circumspect about that one. Yeah. Basically, once the original papyri that are the basis for the plates that come at the beginning of the book of Moses were found. Or sorry, the book of Abraham. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, there was really no more option that Joseph Smith was anything but an intentional fraud. Sorry. I just cannot take that claim at face value when you found the thing that he was supposed to have been translating from, and it's literally just a standard ancient Egyptian text. And the areas where his facsimiles
Oh, come on.
differ from standard Egyptian motifs are exactly the areas where the papyri in question have lacunae. It's just like, nope, that's beyond the pale of something that I'm going to hold open as a thing that is even reasonable to not reject out of hand. I mean, you could make the argument that, oh, God miraculously revealed some kind of information about Abraham through him looking at an entirely unrelated papyrus.
All right, am I here now?
You have been here the whole time.
Oh,
Don't worry about it. So, just continue on from where we left off. So, Brigham Young is trying to get everyone to go to Utah, but Joseph Smith's family isn't having it.
Okay, so Emma Hale Smith, the wife of Joseph Smith, okay, was not a fan of what is that called? Polygamy.
Yes. Although I think they were calling it plural marriage to avoid that word.
Yeah.
And Emma Hale
She
Smith
didn't-
was a wife at that point.
Yes.
One of an undefined number.
I can hear you coming back through.
I don't know what might be the problem on your end with that. But so
That's weird.
was the rejection of polygamy versus Brigham Young's embracing of it one of the reasons that there was this schism? Venerable?
Yeah, you're coming back through and it's confusing me.
Okay.
Yes.
And
So there was a schism over polygamy. The Midwesterners who ended up following Joseph Smith III did not like polygamy. And neither did
neither did whom?
and neither did Emma Hale Smith, of course.
Right.
So they ended up forming this new church.
Okay. And so where was that church located?
It was located in the Midwest around Iowa and Missouri.
Okay. And was there any so with Brigham Young there was basically the exodus of a large portion of the population of Mormons from Nauvoo. Did Emma Hale Smith also pick up and move people out of there, or did she stick around in the area?
She stayed. Yeah, she stayed. The move to Iowa was later.
Okay. So now that does mean that a lot of the current distinctive aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints actually came after Joseph Smith's death, So
Yes.
one of the things that would mean then is
yeah.
that so this community of Christ probably doesn't share some of these. So what are some of those significant differences, things people might think of when they think of, say, Mormonism that is actually
Well, there's no magic underwear.
okay?
That was, and then there's also there's the Book of Abraham was something that they didn't. A lot of the later stuff that Joseph Smith did Joseph Smith III decided not to allow like polygamy and stuff like that, and um, uh, he became known as the pragmatic prophet. He's kind of a more moderate figure. So today, the modern church is far more progressive than the Mormon church,
Okay.
and the Smith family actually kept being prophet presidents of the church for a very long time.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it became sort of a dynastic thing, huh?
Yes, the last Smith that was head of the church was Wallace B. Smith, and uh left the prophet presidency in the 90s, I think.
Okay. Now, was there just not another Smith to take his place, or did he intentionally end the sort of uh
He's he's still alive. He's 91, living his life.
so how did that come about?
Um it it doesn't really tell you why, and I don't know why. He just decided to give it up for somebody else.
Who
And
was not a
now
Smith?
huh?
I said who was not a Smith.
Yeah, who is not a Smith. Now it's an elected position, but you are elected until you die, essentially. The president right now is Stephen Veazey.
Okay. Now, how large is this group in terms of numbers of people?
Pretty small. I've never randomly met somebody who is part of this church.
Okay.
All everybody in the church is pretty much when you're in the area, you all do things together, and even so we have a big giant summer camp that happens in Iowa at the university I went to, called Spec, where pretty much every single teenager from this church comes together and has a sporting godly experience. It's kind of hard to explain
Hmm.
for a week.
Okay. So at that point, you basically you know everyone else because it's a small enough group that everyone in your age group gets together. So you're unlikely to be surprised by some stranger who's a member of this church.
Yeah. Everybody that went to my university that was from the Community of Christ I'd already met at Spec.
Right.
And every once in a while they do have an international Spec where everybody comes, and it still wasn't a very big experience, but there were people from all over. There was a sizable portion of people from French Polynesia that I
Interesting.
saw.
So
Yeah.
does the Community of Christ have a similar proselytizing push like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints does? Do they send out?
No.
Okay. So how do they go
No.
about getting new members?
Um really, you're just supposed to teach people about how God loves them, you know? Like if they ask, you don't actually have you actually don't have active proselytizing to people.
Okay.
Usually the people that come in are the people who date members, and they just come to church.
Okay. So that's interesting. That's a pretty big distinction there. That there is not a big push to get other people in because if there's one thing that I normally associate with with the the Latter Day Saints, it's a huge push to try to get everyone possible in, including people who've already died.
Yeah, we do not that is one of the things that is not accepted by our church. We do not baptize the dead.
Okay. Um. Oh, why isn't my comment showing up on this video? Says Smitty. So Smitty, it's entirely possible that you triggered some kind of like auto mod thing on YouTube. YouTube sometimes likes to just hide, even from me, comments, and I'm not entirely sure why it did that. So it could just be one of those. And sometimes the comments I don't actually think are terribly worth being auto modded, but they just are. So that's probably what's happening. Or it could be that there's a server hiccup in terms of where they store their comments. That's less likely. I usually assume it's just Google's auto mod being weird. So sorry about that. All right, so now you grew up in this group, right?
Pardon?
You grew up in this group.
Yes, I grew up in this group.
Okay. And so were you exposed to other religious ideas or the possibility of having no religious ideas?
I did. It's not really that big of a, like, it's not culty kind of. I shouldn't use that word, but it's pretty different in that way from the Mormons. Like, you can experience different ideas and everything. We all believed in evolution at my church. I didn't even know people didn't believe in evolution until I actively found stuff on YouTube. I didn't know at all.
Okay. Well, now that's a little interesting because there's the Latter-day Saints are a little bit sort of, I guess, wishy-washy when it comes to evolution. They're very hard to pin down. They tend not to be much on young Earth, but they do tend to say be not huge fans of things like humans sharing common ancestry with non-humans and things like that. So was there any pushback about human ancestry? Well, saying like, oh no, we had to say that there was a miraculously created
No,
Adam and Eve.
we essentially, the community of Christ really doesn't care what you believe about evolution or anything. They do not tell you, oh, you can't believe in evolution. And I grew up in a pretty progressive community, so it's not, they definitely didn't care. And they all pretty much ascribe to progressive values. As soon as Obergefell v. Hodges came through, they were like, okay, we are going to allow gay marriage in the church, and gay people can become priesthood members. And
That's interesting.
yeah.
That is a much more progressive stance than the Latter-day Saints. What do you think is attributable what do you think you can attribute that to?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's because of Joseph Smith the Third, and no Vandalia 1998. We do not have that in the community of Christ.
And he says, of course,
Of
for
getting our own
199,
world.
and he says for 199, is getting to control your own world really a thing? Which is, it is a thing that is at least a possibility held out for some male members of the Latter-day Saints, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But yeah, like you said, I would have guessed, since you said a lot of the later stuff from Joseph Smith has been kind of ignored by the community of Christ.
Yeah. So Joseph Smith III is known as the pragmatic prophet. And so he essentially just decided to be more progressive.
Okay. Now, there is a question that I have regarding this, which is that, so if you're going to accept Joseph Smith's prophethood, how, on what basis do you reject certain parts of the things that he continued teaching? Because you remember, like, the Book of Abraham and a lot of the sort of like the henotheistic aspects of his teachings, like that there is a plurality of worlds, each of which is ruled over by its own analog of Elohim and whatnot. That those were things that he was teaching. So how do you say that he was right about, say, the Book of Mormon, and that, yeah, really, Jesus appeared to him and Angel Moroni appeared to him, and these are authentic scriptures from the New World, but then also say that other stuff that he claimed were revelations or that were revealed in similar ways are just things we don't have to pay attention to.
So, coming from it as somebody who is from Seattle, personally, in my churches, we actually never read the Book of Mormon. I never read the Book of Mormon.
Hmm.
Um, but when I went to the Midwest, those communities uh, were far more proud of the Book of Mormon and stuff like that. They had like museums and libraries dedicated to it. But where I was at, we didn't really care about the Book of Mormon. I had a little bit of a class when I was planning on getting baptized, where I had to learn the history of the church.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I didn't really know about it.
So, does the Community of Christ consider it part of their canon of Scripture?
Yes, they do. I don't know why in my church we just didn't emphasize it, and they don't emphasize it on a national scale. But I do know that locally in the Midwest they do care about it a lot more.
Okay, so I guess that still leaves. I still am wondering the same question. If it's even if it's not super well or super heavily emphasized, it still is a part of the things from Joseph Smith that the Community of Christ accepts. So I guess, do they have an explanation as to why they sort of get to pick and choose which parts of Joseph Smith's teachings to accept, or do you just kind of go with it?
We just kind of go with it. I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there, probably, about
Okay.
it.
I mean, it's not like it would be the first time that a religion or a sect of religion just decided that certain things they were just not going to bother with. So, okay, I
Yeah.
mean, hey, fair enough, I guess. I
I
would think
do
that,
know that there was a congregation in Missouri. I did forget to mention that the headquarters of the church are in Independence, Missouri,
okay,
and there is a congregation there that I went to because I was staying with the family for Thanksgiving because I didn't have anybody else to stay with because I'm from Seattle and I didn't want to fly all the way over here and then go back.
right,
Um, they still call themselves the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
which is the group's
And
original name, right?
yes, the group's original name. And they seem to be more conservative. I remember overhearing the man of the household saying something about gay people that wasn't very nice.
Okay.
So,
Is this congregation
and
still considered part of the broader organization?
they at least think that they are. I know that they talk about how, because there's a big temple in Independence, Missouri, and they're like, oh, that's our temple and everything, and they're really proud of it. But I have a feeling like that they've kind of separated themselves a little bit more from the community. They've separated themselves a little bit more from the community of Christ than most congregations.
Okay. I do want to remind our viewers to please hit like. It really does help. I'm seeing very, very few likes out there compared to the number of viewers. So now I know that there is. So we've already established that there's a difference in the temple worship aspects. In that, the so-called magical underwear or temple garments are given out as part
Yeah.
of the endowment ceremony in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and also the baptism for the dead is also takes place in there. So what does take place in the Community of Christ temple?
So what takes place in the community of Christ temple is a prayer for peace every day. And that's pretty much it. During spec we go and tour it. Um there's a walkway on the way into the temple's oh man, the main area of the temple. There's like this place where there's a bunch of sculptures and everything, but um, other than that, oh, that's also where the church's um leadership meets and does all of its stuff. We actually do more stuff across the street at what's called the auditorium. That's where everybody comes together and votes on different issues and votes on who the prophet president is going to be. Um, every once in a while, you'll have a church service in the temple. That's pretty much. And then Spec goes there for at least 3 days before they go up to Graceland University, which is my university. I forgot to mention that.
Right. Okay, so they're not doing baptisms or weddings there.
No,
Okay.
no, they are not.
Now, so Graceland University is a university run by the church, right?
It is. It used to be run by the church. It was founded by the church, and now it is just sponsored by the church. If you are a church member, they will give you a scholarship, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's still an explicit relationship. Like, do they have like on-campus church services and things like that?
Yes, they do. At the there is a church on there that they do church services there. Uh, the housing system there is kind of weird, so it's kind of hard to explain. But essentially, each hallway has a different house. It's kind of like a fraternity, but not as fun. And they do elect a chaplain
Okay.
to essentially, not evangelize, but they're like the spiritual. They're like the spiritual person on the hall.
Okay. So, now is this university is accredited, right? Like, most people are going to accept this degree as being a legitimate degree if you're going there, which is the
Oh,
case for most
yeah.
religious universities. I think one thing that people sometimes forget is that most universities that are explicitly associated with a religion are not Patriot Bible School, right? Like,
Hmm.
most of them are actual academic institutes with actual accreditation from national accreditation and just or agencies that are not just basically rubber stamping diploma mills. Like so. And what did you study there?
I studied history and I minored in political science.
Okay. And so you did say you wanted to talk about sort of leading this group. So was history a part of that, or is that something that came later, or were you already drifting away at the time that you went to school?
You know, I drifted away at school mostly because I was away from my congregation, I guess. There wasn't that need to go
Right.
to church anymore. So I just kind of stopped and I started thinking about all this stuff and then learning how yeah, like what the Book of Mormon was
Hmm.
and how absolutely wild it is.
Yeah, it is a very strange text, and it does not correspond well to anything we know in history, genetics, or archaeology.
Yeah, so that kind of sort of started me down the route, and then I guess I was an atheist for a while. Um but I just didn't really know it, and then I I stumbled upon a godless engineer video and boom,
Hmm. Now,
I find hmm,
sorry, I was going to ask. During this time, had you found out that there were people who were also rejecting things like evolution and the age of the Earth and all that stuff?
yeah, I found that out after starting to watch godless engineer videos. I was like, "What?" I knew people didn't accept evolution, but I assumed that they knew that the earth was old.
Okay. So, what did you think about that? Like, does that seem kind of crazy?
Well, for my whole life I have loved things like uh in my early life, I liked dinosaurs, probably more than most children. I knew how to pronounce all of the different names like Appalachiosaurus, Montgomeryensis, and stuff.
Nice.
Um, so to me, it was just insane. And then the history stuff, like actually believing the flood happened. Uh,
Okay, so you didn't believe that the flood happened as a literal
no,
worldwide thing.
no. Most of the Old Testament stuff was just kind of taught as like oh, this is a lesson to be learned kind of thing, not an actual stuff. The New Testament was taught as history, though.
Okay, well then what about say the Book of Mormon? Because the Book of Mormon, it starts out happening around the time of, if I remember correctly, the first, the people get on a boat and come to the New World is around the time of the Babylonian exile. So that's,
Yeah.
that's going to be after the books of Kings and Chronicles, but it's going to be before most of the prophetic works in the Old Testament, in terms of like timeline. So how was that being taught? Was that as like these are a bunch of stories, or is that like when you took that class, were they like, no, these are things that actually happened?
Uh, when I took the class, it was more about here's what Joseph Smith did. Here is what Emma Hale Smith did, and now I'm gonna teach you about Jesus's life and why being baptized is gonna make you more like Jesus and stuff like that.
Hmm.
We really at my university, I mean not university. Oh my gosh, sorry, congregation.
No, no worries.
Uh, we really did not emphasize the Book of Mormon. Now I have talked to my grandparents about that, and they do say that it used to be far more taught far more. But for some reason, maybe it's the fact that the Book of Mormon is absolutely wild. They've kind of moved away from it, at least in the Pacific Northwest. Um, there are a lot more people, of course, who believe, but I never really tested their brains on how they believed all of this stuff.
Right.
You know,
Right. Was there anything in particular that made it so that you didn't, or was it just sort of you never it was never really a super strong belief, and then now you were outside of an area where you had to keep going to church? Was there actually like a
well, I mean,
thing?
so I'd always sort of not had a strong belief in God, but I had a source of community from my congregation because most of my friends were from there.
Right.
Um, and then when I went to Graceland, I took a class on New Testament, the history of the New Testament,
Okay.
and it kind of shattered it shattered this idea in my head that the Bible was some sort of like I knew it wasn't inerrant, but at the same time I was like, oh, these people are talking about the same thing, they're just God came down, told them, and then they put the thing the way that they wanted to. And learning that was pretty much instrumental in me
Okay.
seeing the flaw in that belief and eventually investigating and learning all of these different things about the history of the Bible. And it kind of just was like, I can't I can't believe in this stuff anymore.
So, but you weren't taught that, say, um, Constantine made up the New Testament in the Council of Nicaea, were you?
No.
Okay, good, because that's one of my pet peeves is people who say that, because it's
Yeah.
not true. It's not even close to true. All right. So now, when you were studying history, were you studying a lot of church and Christian history, or was it a more general, like American or world history or something?
Most of the professors that work there are not part of the church. Most of the people who are part of the church come through the students and the non-teaching staff at the church.
Hmm.
So it was just normal history stuff.
Okay. Well, Christian history is normal history stuff.
Well, for my history classes, I did have to take that New Testament class to keep my scholarship.
Right.
But other than that, I didn't have to learn much about the church.
Okay. Now, has leaving the community of Christ caused problems with like friends and family?
It's definitely caused a little bit of problems with my family. I'm not as close to my old friends as I used to, but that's part of moving to all the way to Iowa and being at university. But yeah, the I can tell my grandma's a little bit disappointed in me that I don't go to church anymore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I have heard heard from my mom that she has said that she wishes that I didn't go to university, which is weird
Hmm.
because it's the church's university. But that's more because I had a big political shift when I went to university too. But
Okay.
there was that point right after I stopped with religion that I got into one of those militant phases,
Yes,
r slash atheist.
Oh
So that did
goodness.
cause issues, huh?
I said, oh goodness. Yeah, r/atheism is I don't talk about it really on the channel, but not I'm not a huge fan of a lot of what goes on in r/atheism. It's usually just cringy horribleness.
Yeah, I was pretty cringy about it after I learned about it. So those were more of problems that I ended up creating myself that I probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good thing that you didn't stick around just hanging out in r/atheism.
Yeah,
It seems like it's just a great way to turn yourself into a jerk if you weren't already one.
yeah. I mean, this channel's kind of helped, like humanizing these people. Because other channels, it's like, oh, we're just gonna dunk on them, but you actually try to have a conversation with people.
I do. That's one of my big goals. Is I want this to be a channel where even if you don't agree with me, you're at least not gonna feel like I'm gonna gang up and ambush you. And that's actually one of the reasons why when I have creationists on, especially if there's a bigger panel than just me, I usually try to make very sure that they get their thoughts and feelings out. Um, so I do have a few more questions, and then I think we're going to kick it over to the audience to see if they have anything for us. Um, but one of my big questions is, how does the community of Christ view the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
To be honest, they think that the Mormons left us, while the Mormons think that we left them.
Okay.
And I know that culturally we're kind of like you know we we kind of, because Joseph Smith had deemed Independence, Missouri to be Zion. Do you know what
Okay.
that term is?
Yeah. So
Like
it was similar to
heaven
what,
on earth.
yeah, and which is more or less what Brigham Young did with Salt Lake City.
Yeah, so like there's this idea that, oh, we got Zion and they left, you know.
Right.
But we largely don't really, we kind of see them as our weird cousins.
Okay. And they probably see you as their. Well, to be fair, you both have weirder cousins out there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if people in the audience know, but there are. Whenever you see those weird stories that come out about like some like group of families in Utah, all of the men in which have like 4 or 5 wives, and they've all got like 40 kids or something, and they live on a weird compound. Yeah, those aren't members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're members of even smaller groups, just sort of like splintered off from it in rejecting its admittedly sort of tepid advances into progressing into modern society. Um, yeah, they're like groups who are like, oh, never should have given up plural marriage, or we never should have let, say, non-white people into the priesthood. And it's like, okay, guys, well, you have fun with that.
That is something that I would like to learn more about. My old church's history with minority groups other than the LGBT community, because I know about that, but
Right.
um but because I don't know much about that, and I would like to know about it.
Bob Knob says anyone naming anywhere in Utah as Zion is obviously very much confused. Um,
Yeah.
Look, I like Utah more than I like Wyoming. I mean, look, Salt Lake City, it's a nice place to visit. I've always have enjoyed myself whenever I've visited Salt Lake City, even if going to the liquor store is a little weird. But
Yeah.
like it's not the worst, but then again, I recognize that a lot of that is because humans have artificially made it much nicer than it would have been. Naturally, it's a bowl with no drainage where there's a big pile of salt and nothing else really. But hey, the nice wide roads are great though. I will say, you know what? Brigham Young's choice to make the roads wide enough so that you could do a U-turn in an ox-drawn cart. Wonderful idea. Love it.
So Thronimulus asked a question that I kind of want to.
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good. I like that. In fact, we'll just throw it open to the audience. That's fine. Um,
Uh,
so Thronimulus asks, "What is the afterlife / after Earth like in the community of Christ?"
so essentially, we believe everybody goes to heaven. We're very nice. Well, I don't know why I'm saying we, but they're
That's all
very
right.
nice.
So that's an interesting thing because that might go towards one of the reasons why there isn't a big proselytizing push.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did have a Sunday school teacher talk about the idea that different people go to different heavens, though, which I know is sort of a Mormon-y thing, but I always personally believe that everybody just went to heaven.
Okay. Well, actually, that's in some ways also similar to the LDS belief in that in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, basically the only people who don't end up in some form of paradise are basically Mormon apostates. So
Yeah.
if you're a betting man, it might actually be better off if the Mormons are right to just not be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and not believe it, because if you join and then stop believing it, now you're in real big trouble.
Yeah, everybody gets a chance to go to heaven pretty much in Mormonism. And that's why they do the baptism for the dead. It's like, because you have like this purgatory period, you know,
Yeah.
where you're not in heaven, but you pretty much are taught about, you know, the real church for as long as you're there,
Ah.
and then you finally get to go. But unless somebody is baptized for you, which is where that comes from, but we don't have that.
Did you at one point?
No, that was one of the things that Joseph Smith III just outright rejected.
Yeah. Well, now Dr. Truth brings up something that's interesting. He says, "I've always been a fan of Universalism. I don't believe any of it, but it's a nicer belief than what I was taught." Um, so interestingly enough, it's not just in sort of Mormonism and in sort of the wide sense, right, of people who churches who accept the say the Book of Mormon, right? If we say all those
The
groups
Latter-day
are,
Saints movement.
yeah, the Latter Day Saints. That's a good way to put it too. Sorry. So Universalism extends well beyond that. So you can actually find Universalist writings in Christian history going all the way back into like the 3rd century. Now, traditionally, Christianity in sort of the larger, and I don't want to really say like mainline, but I guess sort of the mainstream groups of Christianity, the ones that people typically think of. You get like the 2 largest groups, of course, of Christians are the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. But then also you get some of the other Eastern groups, and as a group, they all generally don't say that Universalism can't be right. Especially the Eastern groups. A fairly common belief there is that anyone can be saved, but some people may choose not to be, and there's still the holding open the option of some kind of salvation in the afterlife. So the idea that you get in a lot of American Protestant Christianity, where it's like, oh, you didn't believe in Jesus, go right down to hell, no chance to ever recover from that mistake, is actually not as traditional or widespread a belief in Christianity as a whole as you might think. But Protestants in America like to think that they themselves are the only versions of Christianity, or the only version of Christianity that matters, or that exists, or that has anything to say. And so it's the same reason why you get people like Ken Ham saying, well, we just believe the Bible, and this is the Bible's position on origins. It's like, no, not really. You don't have a monopoly on Genesis, buddy. So, yeah, I do want to point that out about the universalism. It is, in fact, more widely held belief in Christianity than a lot of people realize. Which is another question. So I know that traditionally, most American Christian groups do not consider Mormons to be Christians. Was that something that the Community of Christ has to deal with? Are they well known enough that people even have a position on it? They do seem like they have fewer of the distinctive beliefs of later Latter-day Saints, or organizations that descend from where the group that Brigham Young led. So do they still have that weird thing where Christians are like, oh, you guys aren't real Christians?
When you say you're from the Community of Christ, of course, that name doesn't really tie you to the Latter-day Saints movement. So they're
Right.
like, oh, so what do you guys believe? And then if you elaborate, then they pretty much just tie you in as a Mormon. I don't know if they were like, oh, you're not a Christian, but they're like, you're a Mormon, you're a crazy Mormon. And then it's like, you either just stick with, yeah, I'm the Community of Christ and not get the hassle, or you end up having to explain to somebody the entire theology of the church for
That sounds like a hassle.
5 hours.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then they'll still probably think you're a Mormon at the end.
Okay. So yeah, it sounds like it's that is one of the problems with being a small part of a group that has a much larger and more culturally dominant group that you're not really associated with. Is it's hard not to get lumped in. So I can see that.
Yeah.
Actually noticed that there's a group that has a small presence over where I grew up, which is the Polish National Catholic Church, which is actually an old Catholic church, which that is a group that well, according to the Roman Catholic Church, broke away shortly after the Protestant Reformation. And so the thing is, though, that very few people realize that they're not Roman Catholic. And so they look like they're Roman Catholic, and they say a Mass that's more or less identical to the Roman Catholic Mass. And yeah, but it's just like everyone's just like, oh, you guys are just Roman Catholics. Like, no, they're not. They are, in fact, a separate group. They aren't in communion with the Pope of Rome. They have their own leadership. They, don't consult with Rome about who's going to be the next bishop of whatever. So, yeah, it is a fairly common thing that happens when you get a smaller group that kind of, I don't want to say break away, because it's really not fair to say which group broke away, because I don't actually think that like the Roman Catholic Church is the one true Catholic Church. I don't have a position on that. But
I mean, the Community of Christ definitely broke away from the Mormons, in my opinion. But
I guess you could say that the smaller group is the one that breaks away, just to make it easy that way.
Yeah, it's more because my former church didn't begin until 1860. So, I mean, yeah, we kept the Smiths, but we came later.
Well, I mean,
and we largely rejected a lot of its teachings too. So.
And that's fair. I think that is the eventual rejection of a lot of the later teachings of Joseph Smith does, in fact, I would say make it. You have a reasonable case of saying that they broke away from the larger, more conservative, say, Latter-day Saints movement.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm pretty fine with having grown, because I mean, we never really had problems with being too conservative. If anything, my grandpa complains about our church being too liberal. So
No, that is one of those things where it's like if you're trying to modernize, especially a religious group, there's often going to be some significant pushback. And I think it's understandable. You know, a lot of times, if you think that your religious group has it right, then if it tries to change, how could that be changing in any way other than to become less right? So I get that inclination. Like it's a pretty logical thing.
well, when I say that, it's more on a political sense, not. He's
Uh,
been fine with allowing women into the priesthood and the gay marriage stuff. It's just
Actually,
most of the political views.
I didn't ask, but I guess I didn't know that they allowed women into the priesthood too, which is something that the LDS Church does not.
Yeah, it actually caused a pretty big split. A lot of people either formed their own churches, or I think probably went to the Mormon church afterwards because they weren't very happy about it.
Hmm. And Dr. Truth says that's what we used to think about the Episcopalians. Yeah, the Episcopalians also sometimes get mixed up with Catholics. You get a lot of, and of course, you know, both the old Catholics and the Episcopalians are to some extent sort of breakaway groups from Catholicism. And unlike most Protestant groups, neither group really shed a lot of the outward trappings of Catholicism, especially not the old Catholics. It's actually an interesting story. I'll tell it really quickly. So, during the Protestant Reformation, a lot of areas in what's now Germany, at the time it was, you know, various parts of like Prussia, the Holy Roman Empire, all that stuff. Doesn't matter. A lot of those areas were under Protestant rule, and so you weren't allowed to be Catholic. But a lot of people there still felt like they were religiously Catholic, and they didn't agree with the Protestant theology. They didn't like the Protestant worship services. They wanted to be Catholic, and so there was a underground group of churches that, for a while, were still able to sometimes communicate with Rome, but that basically continued on with the theology and liturgical traditions of the Roman Catholic Church. And then after sort of the various wars over whether Europe would end up being Protestant or Catholic ended, and the result was you can just kind of pick. You get to choose if you want to be Protestant or Catholic as an individual, which was actually some of the first instances of even a modicum of religious freedom anywhere in the world. So that was an interesting outcome of that. But so a lot of these, what Rome did was they said, all right, well, we now need bishops and parishes in these places that used to have them, but that are now, you know, people are now free to be Catholic again. But as they were sending out these new bishops and priests and stuff, the people who were from this community that had been living there for, in some cases, up to a century, underground as Catholics popped up, and they were said, "Hey guys, we're kind of still here." Yeah, and Rome was like, "Oh, gee, well, we already elected a bunch of bishops and stuff, so you guys can get to both be the bishop, and you can be the bishop of the older congregations that kind of hid underground." Okay, great. So then comes time for the Vatican Council, and guess whose bishops don't get an invite? Yeah.
The Polish ones.
Well, it wasn't primarily Paul. It was a whole bunch of groups, but it was all the bishops who were part of that Roman Catholic Church that had gone underground. None of their bishops came as representatives, and so when the Vatican Council made all these decrees, like, you know, that the Pope would speak ex cathedra to define dogma from his position as the Bishop of Rome, that he had the final say in electing bishops, all sorts of stuff like that. It was really, the First Vatican Council was really one of the things that really solidified the current position of the Pope as the guy in charge of everything. And they were like, well, we were never consulted on that, and we managed to get around for a century without needing the Pope. So, we're out, guys. We're done with this. So that is how the old Catholic Church started. And, yeah, they still maintain a lot of the art and liturgy and even a lot of the music and stuff like that from the Roman Catholic Church. But in other ways, they've gone in very interesting ways. So there are some groups of them that will allow female clergy. They have varying positions on, say, LGBTQ issues and stuff like that. So it's another one of those interesting little tidbits of religious history that's out there, and you can find them every once in a while. But yeah, so yeah, Methodists were a bit of a split. Dr. Truth brings up they were sort of a splinter group away from the Anglican Church. Originally, they were just a group of Anglicans who met together for fellowship and Bible studies and things, but then eventually they stopped feeling the need to really attend Anglican services on top of that, and they started to form their own churches. And that's also why Methodists still have bishops in charge of various areas. They carry that tradition over from Anglicanism, which never abandoned it when it split away from Catholicism.
Oh, yeah.
Which actually reminds me, what is the leadership structure like for the church? Or sorry, the community of Christ? Because we said that you have a president, a prophet president, and then who's
president?
who's under the prophet president?
You have the first presidency, which is just a council around them, and then there's the Council of the 70. Each congregation has a pastor, and then there's membership that's divided into two different types. Can't remember what they're called, but they tie back to Aaron and stuff in the Bible and stuff.
Oh, is there the Aaronic priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthood?
Yes, that's it right there.
Yeah, I know that because I remember it from learning about the Latter-day Saints overall. Because that was there were instances in the life of Joseph Smith in which he says that he was ordained into these priesthood orders to return them to the world because they had become extinct. Because, interestingly, not in common with a lot of the Protestant sort of milieu in which Joseph Smith was operating, but in common with a lot of other Christian traditions, the LDS movement has this idea that you need to have some kind of valid succession of priesthood, that in order to become someone with a priesthood authority, you have to have been ordained by someone else who had some level of authority in the same order of priesthood, and that for some reason over the course of Christian history these orders had become extinct. And so Joseph Smith, in the series of 2 alleged visions, is restored to both of these so that he can then go on and ordain other people into these priesthoods and reestablish a line of succession.
Yeah, and also in order for that to happen, the priest or whatever has to have a vision or a discernment from God that the person that they are going to induct into the priesthood should be in the priesthood.
Okay. That's interesting because in the larger LDS church, it's basically if you're a male over a certain age and you haven't been obviously living a terrible life, they're just going to bring you into at least some level of the priesthood.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same way. All the adults at my congregation are pretty much in the priesthood, but they have this call from another priesthood member saying, I had a vision that you are supposed to be a part of the priesthood, and then
it's just very common visions.
Yeah, and then they lay their hands on you, and then you become part of the priesthood.
All right. So OLM asks about stakes and wards, which of course are those are sort of administrative and congregational subdivisions in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Is there a similar structure? It seems like there isn't.
There is a similar structure. I was part of the GPNW, Greater Pacific Northwest kind of ward, and they plan everything for, like, essentially how you tithe and everything. It goes through them.
Okay. Well, that is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And they plan church camps and stuff.
Okay. Now that is another interesting question because so the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does have a requirement to maintain yourself as a member in good standing that you give 10% of your gross income to the church, and they will check with your tax records to make sure if there's any question. Is there a similar requirement in the Community of Christ?
There is not, but most people just do it because.
Okay, so it's sort of a cultural.
They think that it's good.
It's sort of a cultural expectation, but you're not going to get kicked out or anything.
No.
Well, to be fair,
membership is.
I was going to say, to be fair, Oh, go ahead. There's a delay. Don't worry about
Oh,
it.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, so I was just gonna say, to be fair, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints also won't kick you out for failing to tithe. They will, however, take away your temple recommend, which means you can't get into the temple to do the various ceremonies that you're supposed to do, which is the only way that, according to them, you're going to get your best possible afterlife option.
Yeah, it's not necessary to go to the temple, but usually people really want to go because it's like, oh, the spiritual stuff. But I have actually tried to end my membership with the church, but they refuse. So
Now that's interesting. How is one supposed to go about doing that, and what do they do to refuse? Like, how does that look?
I essentially go up to my pastor and say, I don't want to be a part of the church. And he's like, no. You'll still be on
Interesting.
the emailing list. You'll still be all this stuff. And from his position, he's thinking that it's good for me to still get updates. And it's like, I'm constantly getting emails about stuff I don't care about.
Yeah. Interesting. I wonder. Yeah, I guess I get why he's doing it, because he's still probably hoping that you're going to be coming back at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. I do know that there are some other groups that it can be hard to be taken off the membership rolls. It's not very easy to get taken off the membership rolls of, say, the Roman Catholic Church, for one thing. Like, if you were baptized as a Catholic, they're probably just going to keep you on that on a list somewhere. They tend not to email you. You don't usually get like emails from the Catholic Church. I'm not sure what that would look like. But yeah, they like to count all of their members as anyone who's ever been baptized.
Well, these emails are more about like, oh, you got to pray for this person in our congregation. They've asked for prayers. Yeah, you're supposed to ask for prayers if you are in either a hard time or you are, what's it called? If you have an injury, you're supposed to ask for prayers from the congregation. And I guess it's supposed to help heal them.
Well, hey guys, if it's gonna help, feel free to pray for my computer, because I don't know what's up. So hey, it won't hurt. I think actually maybe it will. Maybe if there's a different God that's real and you pray to a God that isn't that one, he'll get angry and attack my computer. All right, I don't know. I'm willing to risk it, guys. I'm willing to risk it. Feel free to pray for my computer if you want to.
But yeah, also you can request the priesthood to lay hands on you if you are ill.
Okay. Now that's something that's straight out of the New Testament. That's actually a fairly common thing in a lot of various groups of Christianity. So that's I would say a fairly standard Christian thing there. Dr. Truth does said, and I'm not exactly sure what he has a word in there, but basically he asks about Kolob, and I'm going to go ahead and guess that the community of Christ doesn't really take seriously all of Joseph Smith's ideas about, Elohim living on a star called Kolob and in another star system and other planets and all that.
No, I'm guessing that Joseph Smith III kind of just saw that stuff and was like, wow, my dad kind of got crazy later in life.
I mean, it certainly, look, the progression of Mormon beliefs starts out pretty solidly just like Christianity with a little bit of fanfic tossed in. And not very much, really. Like, if you look at just the Book of Mormon, it's hard to get very much in terms of distinctive theology that doesn't comport with just sort of broadly, Protestant Christianity. It's really hard to get any of the really distinctive beliefs of Latter-day Saints out of just that book. There's a little bit in there, but then as time goes on, he starts to drift farther and farther and farther away from that. And interestingly, when he did that, usually there would be some people who would drop off and be like, nah, we're not down with that. And up until very late, they tended to just go kind of meld back into Protestant Christianity. But like with the community of Christ, eventually you get so far in that you have people who have moved halfway across the country, or at the time, I guess, all the way across the country, depending on exactly what you mean by that. You have people who, they have whole communities around them that are built up off of this religious identity, and it becomes hard to just kind of abandon that whole community and identity when you're out in the middle of nowhere. And so I can see why it is the case that you really get these schisms later on, after he's already gone a fair bit of ways from standard Christianity. But even then, he goes farther and farther, and some of them are just like, we liked all this earlier stuff, but this later stuff is a little weird. We're just not gonna.
Yeah. So an interesting story about how my grandmother's family came into the church is that they actually went with Brigham Young,
Oh wow.
and along the journey, because of the polygamy stuff, one of my family's daughters had been selected to be married to this church higher up, and he got ran off the property with a gun. So they were like, okay, we have to leave. So they fled to Idaho and decided to join the Community of Christ later on.
Okay, that's
When they came
interesting.
up.
So they weren't
Yeah.
they weren't originally people who had rejected the leadership of Brigham Young. That's interesting. I wonder
Yeah.
how much that did happen, because one of the things I think that people don't realize is it wasn't just that, they were encouraging people to marry more than one woman. They were assigning people, and it wasn't.
Mhm.
There wasn't a whole lot of interest in whether or not the woman involved, or in many cases the young girl involved, wanted to do this.
No,
So
her parents didn't want, because I think she was really young, so they're like, ew, no. And
yeah,
so they had to flee, and that's actually why there's a lot more Community of Christ in Idaho than you would think.
oh, because rather than fleeing all the way back to what, Iowa, they're
Yeah.
just go up toward. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I guess it also explains why there are some in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see why that would be the case. Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that people really don't talk about often. Is even with Joseph Smith, one, we don't know how many women he ended up having marriage ceremonies with, and we do know that some of them were quite young,
Yeah.
like 13, 14, young.
The Community of Christ denies that Joseph Smith ever married other women, but
He obviously
that's
did, though. How did they get away with that?
yeah. I don't know. It's actually pretty funny because Joseph Smith III went and talked to some of the people that his dad that said that they had married his dad, and he was like, "Well, I can neither confirm nor deny, but I will err on the side of deny." Essentially,
I
yeah,
guess, but like, I mean, we have multiple. So here's an interesting little facet about the Latter Day Saints movement. In a lot of groups, there's an encouragement for people to keep journals or diaries. And a lot of this is because there's this idea that some of the stuff that then became what they now consider scripture essentially were just people writing down what happened to them. And so, since the Latter Day Saints movement tends to be associated with the idea of an open canon, and that new scriptures can be added.
yeah. The Doctrine and Covenants.
Right. So
I forgot to talk about that. My bad.
oh well, we can still talk about that. We still have a little bit of time. But one of the things there is that a lot of Latter Day Saints movement groups will encourage members to keep journals or diaries, because those could form part of a later scripture if something significant enough happens and you're recording the events. So one of the things that means is we have a lot of diaries and journals and whatnot from the time and place where Joseph Smith was. And there really is not a whole lot of question. There's a lot of corroboration that, yes, Joseph Smith married a whole bunch of women and a whole bunch of girls. And
Yeah.
that his wife Emma was not at all happy with this. And
Yeah.
but she was
That's
not
probably
the wife.
why.
Yeah, that probably is because she was a big part of the founding. But yeah, talk about the
Yeah.
Doctrine and Covenants, and maybe also the Pearl of Great Price. Are those works that are considered to be scriptural in the Community of Christ?
We have a different Doctrine and Covenants to
Interesting.
the Mormons. Essentially, after Joseph Smith dies and Brigham Young starts making the Doctrines and Covenants, that's where it splits, and now the Community of Christ prophet presidents are getting the word from God on what to put in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Okay. Now, I also have a question about the word of wisdom, which for people who don't know is the basis on which the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints forbids its members alcohol and coffee and tea. Now,
We don't have that.
Yeah, that's what I figured, but I wanted to get in there. So, do members of the Community of Christ drink alcohol or tea or coffee?
Yeah, I mean, my grandpa drinks coffee like it's water. So
Well, I will say, for non-religious reasons, maybe be careful with that, because getting a caffeine addiction isn't fun. I've had many of them over the years.
oh yeah, I have a pretty bad one right now. Is soda, but I'm working on it.
They are a pain to get over. When I was in the Navy, I would live off of coffee for a while, just because I didn't really have much of another option. But then, when I would get back and have a reasonable schedule again, I would try to wean myself off of it, and I used to get the worst headaches from that. The caffeine withdrawal headaches are not fun.
I get the jitters. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's not fun either. Um, okay, so I think that was a nice, interesting look at a group that we don't normally hear about, and how they connect to the history of one of the larger religions in North America, and ultimately one of the few religions to really start in North America, as far as Christian movements go. Mormonism really is sort of overall the Latter-day Saints movement is sort of a uniquely American phenomenon, even though it has spread out from there. I mean, it's so much of its history and the significant events, and whether they be verifiable historical or somewhat less verifiable, shall we say, all center in and around.
Yeah, and a lot of that is supposed to happen around Missouri too. That's why that's Zion, is because that's where all that stuff was happening. So
yeah, that's true.
Very little Book of Mormon.
Very little of actually. Well, so one of the problems with the Book of Mormon, right, is that it makes references to cities and places and stuff, but you can't put them on a map. There is no identifiable map of the events of the Book of Mormon. You can't really map them onto any. There's no like archaeological evidence that maps onto this very well or anything like that. But
they will forge stuff.
Oh yeah, actually, I was in a town that was famous, well, semi-famous for having a forged Mormon artifact. So I was, and actually I learned about this artifact while I was in the town, which was weird. So there's a little town called Las Cruces, New Mexico. It's like 20 minutes south of Albuquerque, and it's very small. There's a main strip and a few neighborhoods to either side of it, and that's about it. That's the whole town. Well, it was the whole town. It's now becoming much, much bigger because of a data center that's being built there. But anyway, in a trash dump in Las Cruces was once found a stone with what looked like Paleo-Hebrew carvings on it, and they were bits of. I was thinking. Yeah, they were bits of Bible verses, and so this was in fact an attempt by a Mormon to create fake artifacts that would back up the contentions of the Book of Mormon, because one of the main contentions in the Book of Mormon is that people fleeing the Babylonian occupation of Judea managed to get to the New World, and that they are either the primary or at least a significant portion of the ancestry of modern Native Americans. They're not. And in fact, in recent editions of the Book of Mormon printed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they've made less and less strong statements about the supposed Jewish ancestry of Native Americans. So it's interesting. It used to be that they are the ancestors of the modern, Native Americans. Then it was they are among the principal ancestors of the Native Americans. And then they said they are among the ancestors of the Native Americans.
And then the reason why Native Americans have dark skin in Mormonism is like, whew.
Yeah, they were cursed by God for fighting against the people who were following God in various wars.
Yeah. They also really love the idea that Quetzalcoatl is, supposed to be white or something. I've heard them say that uh, you know, Mesoamerican gods are supposedly white. So that's proof right there.
Oof. Yeah, that's not a good look.
Yeah,
So
no.
Dr. Truth says, what is Reformed Egyptian? Which is a good question.
It is a made-up language that Joseph Smith made up.
Yeah, and actually, I would say it doesn't even rise to the level of a made-up language like, say, like Dothraki from Game of Thrones or Klingon, in that you could learn to speak those languages. In fact, there are books that will help you do it. There is no work really, except with one exception, which I'll go over, on Reformed Egyptian. Now, the one exception is there are some journal notes from the people who were supposedly helping Joseph Smith translate the papyri that then later was used as the basis for the Book of Abraham. And they have little translation notes with these nonsense gibberish pronunciation guides with characters. So they were writing down characters from the papyrus, or the papyri, because it was more than one papyrus sheet, and then giving whatever it was that Joseph Smith was giving them as some kind of translation. But the thing is that even if you were to look at that and then go back to the papyri, there's too much in the Book of Abraham for it to be that. And so even Joseph Smith then fell back on like, oh, there's, deeper meaning, and, sometimes these signs have a single basic meaning, but in certain contexts, and it was all just clearly just nonsense to make it sound like it was impossible to translate unless you were him. But yeah, Reformed Egyptian is the language that the Book of Mormon was supposed to have been written in, which is curious because if you look, we know that at the time of the Babylonian exile, the people of Judea were literate, and in fact, widely so. We actually have good evidence to say that literacy was actually fairly widespread among the adult population, at least for men, and in Hebrew. And so then there's the question, well, then why were the scribes of their descendants writing in a language apparently descended from Egyptian? Because Egyptian is an entirely different language. It's not even a Semitic language. It is still Afro-Asiatic, so it's somewhat related, but it's sort of like if you moved to a new island and you decided, oh, I speak English, and my kids speak English, and everyone around me speaks English, but let's start writing in a reformed spelling version of Sanskrit. And she's like, why would you do that? That makes no sense at all. Why would anyone ever even think to do that? But, honestly, I think the reason is because at the time of Joseph Smith, no one had deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphics. But Hebrew no one had ever forgotten, well, I mean, some people, but Hebrew had never been forgotten in general. It was not hard to find someone who could read Hebrew, whether they be Jewish or Christian.
Mm-hmm.
You could find Hebrew speakers and Hebrew readers at the time. So he couldn't really claim to read Hebrew because it would be too easy to disprove. So he went with Egyptian, because you can't really prove that he can't read Egyptian because no one else can. But then there's the question, okay, but Egyptologists at the time could recognize authentic hieroglyphic inscriptions from inauthentic ones, because even if you can't read Egyptian hieroglyphics, there are certain patterns into how signs come one after another and what signs there are and what things aren't signs, that it then becomes easy to spot fakes. Or at least fakes that aren't just direct reproductions, or fakes that are done without some knowledge of hieroglyphics. So I think that the reformed part was just to excuse the fact that he didn't even know enough about Egyptology to be able to distinguish real from fake Egyptian artifacts and things like that, and that a real archaeologist could tell that he couldn't even read real Egyptian if he had claimed that. So I really do think that the whole thing was just a clever way to cover up the fact that he was making it up. And you have to remember, this was a man who, before he became a religious prophet, made a lot of his money by pretending to find buried treasure with a dowsing rod, and then whenever he quote-unquote found it, saying, oh, it's under a curse. If you dig for the treasure, it's just going to sink deeper into the earth. So sorry. But trust me, it's totally down there. I'm going to take your money for finding it.
I tried to tell my family about that stuff, and they were like, "No,
I mean, that's one of the things that I find frustrating. There is like these are matters of like just historical record, right? There's there are legal cases about this.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph Smith was in trouble with the law, and it was before he became a prophet. So there wasn't any like, oh, he's a leader of this new religion, because he wasn't. Now, later in his life, there probably was some of that. There was bias against LDS leadership. Although I will say the thing he was in jail for at the end of his life, which was wrecking up someone else's newspaper printing facility, that was a legitimate thing for him to be in prison for.
Yeah, because at the time, uh, Illinois was pretty much, all like very pro Mormon, and then this one newspaper was like, "Hey, the Mormons are kind of weird," and then he was
Mhm.
like, "Okay, I'm gonna go send the Mormon militia and take these guys out."
Yeah. Yeah, he basically just destroyed the entire printing facility of the newspaper. I don't remember what the newspaper was called. But anyway, yeah, of course, the local law enforcement's like, well, you can't just walk up and destroy a dude's newspaper printing building. Like, you can't do that. So they toss him in jail. And then he's concerned that he's going to be lynched. I don't know of any actual evidence suggesting that he was going to definitely be lynched. There was an angry mob outside the prison. But
Mhm.
then some followers smuggled a pistol into him in prison, and then there was a shootout with the mob, and Joseph Smith is one of the people who died in the shootout. Now,
And his older brother. Yeah.
yeah. Now, was the mob going to lynch Joseph Smith? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows because
Yeah.
it's not clear who started shooting first, and it's not clear why they started shooting. So, I know some people who are going to go on the side of like, oh, Joseph Smith died as a brave martyr, and then there are other people who are going to say, oh, he was just a murderous jerk. And I'm not sure that either of those is really supported well by the evidence that we actually have. So,
And Bob Knob does say something like, "That's racist," and I encourage you guys to all look into the Latter-day Saints movement. It is pretty rooted in racism, like the Curse of Cain and stuff
yeah.
like that.
Well, and there's also so the idea that natives of the American continents have dark skin is due to, apparently, according to traditional LDS theology, is due to them fighting wars against the godly descendants of the Israelites who came over to the New World, and God cursed
Hmm.
them with dark skin. But the reason that there are people with black skin in, say, Africa, is because in a pre-mortal world there was a rebellion where Lucifer rebels against God because God went with Jesus' plan instead of his plan for saving humanity. Lucifer didn't like this. So a number of the pre-mortal souls joined him in
Yeah.
rebellion, and they became the things that we now think of as like demons and Satan and whatnot. But then there was another group who fought alongside God, and that's mostly the white people. But then
Yeah.
the black people are people who they didn't technically side with Satan, but they weren't too enthusiastically on God's side either. So God cursed them with dark skin for their lackluster support during a war that they don't remember. And that is one of the reasons why in the
Yeah.
LDS movement, people who weren't white generally were not allowed to be members of the priesthood.
Yeah. And that's
So,
kind of why I wish I could know a little bit more about how they were treated in my movement. Um, but yeah, I need to look into that.
yeah,
Sorry about that.
I wonder what records there are, because being a smaller group, my guess is that there aren't a lot of third party sources, and
Hmm.
I don't know to what degree. Obviously, I don't know to what degree the Community of Christ keeps their own internal records on practices and stuff like that. Like, do they publish like the meetings, or sorry, the minutes of various conferences and meetings and stuff? Is there an
I'm guessing
archive?
that I'm guessing that they do.
Okay, well then, yeah, maybe the
They
archive. Now, I
Yeah.
know that you said that you only had about an hour and a half to be here, and we've been on for just barely under that. So, unless you want to stay a bit later, which please don't feel like you need to, is there anything that you would like to say before you head out? And I'll just close up with some channel stuff.
Yeah. I'm sorry about the beginning of the stream. I know it
It's all
kind of
right.
sucked.
Well,
I am really sorry about that. I
look,
am
it's been the theme
planning
of the
on
week.
yeah. I am planning on making a YouTube channel about English history because as you can tell from my name, well, okay.
Well, as
The
I can
Venerable
tell.
Bede. Yeah, as Dapper can tell, but the Venerable Bede is essentially the first Anglo-Saxon history of England,
Yeah,
historian of England.
yeah, he wrote the
And
ecclesiastical history of the English people.
yeah, so I'm planning on making a YouTube channel on English history. I've got the research done for the first episode, and now I've got to figure out how to make a script
Well,
and then get recording equipment and everything. So, look out for that.
awesome.
Thank you for having me on, Dapper. I'm really sorry about the
No,
beginning.
no,
of
no.
the
Don't worry about
stream.
it. Hey, you know what? When you do actually get that channel up and running and your videos out, make sure you let me know and to update the description for this video with the link to that video, so that way people who are watching this in the distant future can find your content.
Okay, yeah, I will definitely do that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Bye.
All right, bye. All right, well, thank you everyone who came and showed up for this. Make sure you hit like. I still am seeing a few people who haven't hit like. Um, really, there isn't a whole lot to say about the channel news. We got another Kent with Bent coming up on Tuesday. It's going to be the same title as what would have been this week, except that my computer decided to completely, just I don't even want to get back into it. It was a rough couple days with my computer. Then let's see. Thursday is going to be there's going to be a patron request video. So a patron has requested a video about the International Phonetic Alphabet and how that relates to phonetics. So I actually split that into 2 videos because it was getting to be like past a half an hour. So that's coming out. And then Saturday, I'm probably going to do more looking at human history from spirit science. Although there is something that I have to talk about before we get into that on that day that is less pleasant than looking at stupid stuff that Jordan says. So, and then the Tuesday after that should be an Eric with Erica, which again will also be technically a makeup for an Erica with Erica that got displaced for a different stream anyway. So yes, the whole schedule is all weird and off the wall and all over the place, but you should still be expecting to see 3 videos a week next week, and at least 2 the next week, because Tuesdays and Thursdays are I try to always do something for those. Saturdays is sort of the off day. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, night, morning, I don't know, whatever it is. And I will talk to you guys later. And sorry, I haven't put my outro video in here, so I'm just going to stop streaming bluntly.